Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight we have an agenda. I decided that tonight I was going to under promise and over deliver, but then I thought I'd rather be consistent, and therefore I will under promise and under deliver. So first things first. Hello, Raymond, Anders, Rajesh. Good to see you folks in chat. If you have questions, agendas, when do we ever stick to those? Well, as I say in many episodes, Shop Talk is chat driven, and chat drives kind of like Toonces the cat. So sometimes we just go off a cliff. Sometimes I think you try to make me go off the cliff, and I will happily take you up on that offer. So good evening, Salamar. And Raymond says it's like Post-it notes. It I guess, yes, in that the glue always falls off. I think that's where the metaphor goes. I'm not sure. Mike says saying one has an agenda has negative connotations, right? Sometimes. I do have an agenda. It's a private agenda. Specifically, it's over on this screen right here. So, first thing, want to talk about Microsoft Ignite. Starts tomorrow, goes tomorrow through Thursday. And Mala, you had taken a look at some of the sessions in there. What were your thoughts?
So my thoughts are that it is definitely not a SQL Server heavy Ignite, which was not the case even 1 year ago. So it's a big departure from that. And I tried asking a few Microsofties on why that is, and they said, basically, there is nothing planned around the product that they can talk about. That's why, at least that was the answer I heard. So I don't know what to make of that there is nothing planned around the product. I've never heard that line before. But, you taught me to search on data, Kevin, and after I did that, I came up with a few sessions that may be of interest. Hardly a regular Ignite, where you have no problem finding something to go into. But it's not that this year. It's not that at all. It's just maybe 3 or 4 sessions. I'm not even considering the Satya's keynote, which I will definitely listen to tomorrow at 11 o'clock. But otherwise, pretty low year for data people.
That's true. So Anders says it's weak. Ignite is a marketing campaign. Yeah, Ignite's always been marketing for Microsoft. Wondering if Microsoft will use hydrogen and oxygen at their Ignite event. That's a bad pun, Mike. That's a bad pun. So yeah, Ignite has always been about the marketing. It's been, here are the cool new products, here are case studies with customers, and it's been less about deep dives into technical sessions.
No, last 2 years have been really, really good as opposed to earlier Ignites, and I've been to several of them. They are a big party, Microsoft party with Kool-Aid everywhere. But last year, the year before, we had some solid tech sessions. If you can pull up, Ignite 2020, look and see how many solid tech sessions you can find. There's lots of them, and I don't think I even finished watching all of it. But this year, there's hardly anything.
Yeah. Like I looked for SQL, and the term SQL shows up in 9 of the 342 sessions. Data shows up in about a third of them. So there's a fair number of data sessions. There's some emphasis on data science, on data warehousing, on cloud data architectures. But yeah, it's a cold year if you're a SQL professional as far as Ignite. And I guess I'll just go back to saying that yes, there are technical sessions at Ignite. Yes, there's usually some good technical sessions, but I don't know that it's ever been as in depth on the technical side as something like a Path Summit.
No, that's not its purpose. That's not what it was.
Yeah.
But you do get to see some good sessions on upcoming features and what you can expect and all of that, and that's not there this year.
Right. And Anders says, pretty sure this means there will be no SQL Server 2021. If they were going to do a SQL Server 2021, they'd have probably about 2 to 3 more months to get something officially announced.
No, I don't think there is any like that.
Yeah, I have no information. If I did have information, I would have to lie to you and tell you that I have no information. So, yeah, Anders said there would be more SQL stuff at Ignite. You'd probably start seeing some of the sneak previews, but if there were a 2021 release, which, if you asked me in 2019, I would say, yeah, probably 2021's the next release. Maybe 2022. I could still see something happening where they're just keeping it really quiet. But I think you're right. I think some of that stuff would start to slip out at Ignite, because generally they would announce a version of SQL Server either at something like Ignite or at a past summit or at another major conference. They would usually release the first RC, the first release candidate, a fair amount beforehand. Not usually tied with a conference necessarily, but
so last year there was such a crowd of secrecy and all kinds of stuff around when 2019 was going to come out.
Well,
was that the year before when they announced it at Ignite? Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Mala.
I think it was released at Ignite. Was that last year? Oh, the year before.
So for SQL Server 2019, the official release coincided. I think it did coincide with Ignite, and I think the first release candidate was with Past Summit in 2018. I want to. Yeah. Somebody let 2019 slip at Summit 2017. Or let SQL 2019 slip at Summit 2017. Yeah. That does happen occasionally. But yeah, that based on what we're seeing here, I think I would concur that if you read the tea leaves, next version of SQL Server might not be tomorrow. That's as far as I'm going, because I don't want to say anything. I actually don't know anything about when the next version is. SQL 2019 R2. Anders, I will ban you. I will ban you from chat. You do not bring that into my house. I am so glad they burned that stupid R2 notation. So Raymond says, this Ignite looks more focused on cloud usage with data, look up data in a catalog. Yeah, if I search for Purview, I didn't do this beforehand. This shows the intense level of show prep that we do here on Shop Talk. So if you search for Purview, there are four sessions which explicitly state the name Purview. And Azure Purview, by the way, is Microsoft's new version of a data catalog. So data catalog v2. And it's still early on in its process. It hasn't gone to general availability yet. People that I'm hearing I've heard some generally fairly positive things about the product itself. That much of what it's doing is interesting, that there are definitely gaps. This is still a preview product. Say
more on what it can do, Kevin, because I have no clue.
Yeah. Let me pull up a good article. I know Wolfgang Strasser has a few articles on how Purview works and what it does. But basically, it's going to allow you to classify and catalog your data in your environment. So it can scan databases. It can review Power BI data sources. It can look at Excel files and try to classify data, classify information, try to figure out the lineage of data as well. So
wow.
Conceptually, it's really cool. and also ties in well with something like an Azure Synapse Analytics, where I have all of this information and I need to know where it came from and what level of quality that information is before I'm willing to use it in my systems.
Hmm.
Would love to see it try to figure out the lineage of my data. Yeah, I'm not going to say that it's perfect. It's not. But no, Melissa doesn't have a post up on it yet, I don't think. It's a shame. Because I would immediately link to any blog post that she had on Purview. But she has not had one yet. So basically, it's a tool to help you a lot with data governance and data strategy. And yes, it probably won't figure out the lineage of your data, Anders. There's only so much that any tool can do. So, check double checking chat to see if anything else has popped up while I try to get this post here. And in the meantime, here's what Wolfgang has written on Purview. And Raymond found the link to it. I like Wolfgang's explanations. He's a Microsoft MVP out of Austria and has done a fair amount taking a look at how the thing works, how you can set it up in your own environment, and getting a brief overview of what it's intended to do. And again, cool. Still a preview service, so it's going to hopefully improve over time. But essentially, you scan the data sources in your company, you classify that information within the data sources, and it'll give you an idea of where that data moves across your data estate, is the term that they're using. Then you can catalog that information, so you can search for, well, where are all the places that are using customer address, and get that metadata about where all of your data sources are, and allow people to govern that information a bit better. So if you have to worry about, say, GDPR or some other privacy regime, and I need to find all of the places which have sensitive personally identifiable information, being able to search through that catalog instead of having every team, hey, where are all the places you use any sensitive info? And then finding out 3 months later that, well, I kind of forgot about this one place. Oh, and by the way, there's 12,000 Excel spreadsheets on that share drive. And man, does COBOL cause havoc here. Unique column names for the win. Ah, COBOL. One of these days, I'm going to give a defense of COBOL. Today is not that day. But one of these days, I'm just going to do it. It has its uses.
So
yeah,
am I hearing that you support or like COBOL?
No. However, as devil advocate, I will happily.
It was right for its time. It was right for its time.
So, all right, fine. I need to take a drink first. I might need something stronger than that. Okay, we're gonna do this. Time to defend COBOL. Time to defend COBOL with no research. That's how you know I'm screwed. So, COBOL, common business-oriented language. One of the best parts of COBOL is actually the thing that developers dunk on it for all the time. It was a very explicit, natural language-based language. In other words, you had to write a lot of words, but those words were readable to humans who did not spend their time deciphering weird symbols. And therefore, it was easy for people who were not specialists in the area to be able to get started with this to be able to develop code. A lot of people who are COBOL programmers would not have necessarily considered themselves true programmers. You would throw them in some other language and they would not like it because COBOL had a specific structure, COBOL had a specific need, and it fit certain things really well. If you needed to create fixed sized reports, like I need to print out all of the accounts payable and accounts receivable for the last quarter, it did an excellent job of letting you lay out exactly where you wanted fields to be printed out on that dual colored accounting paper. And it was great at that. It's probably still better than pretty much any language today when it comes to that sort of translating what you want to what shows up on screen to what shows up on printer without a lot of rigmarole. You know, today you have floating divs on a page, and then you move the page a little bit and everything shifts. And you spend days and days and days trying to set that up. Whereas with COBOL, it was basically, I have 80 columns, here's what the 6 columns here are going to look like to whatever else. Aside from that, because of its explicit textual nature, it was relatively easy to debug because you had to do the reading, but it was difficult to, say, flip a symbol. You know, if you talk about a Pascal, you talk about pretty much any other language in that regard, the C world, any core language, you have a lot of symbols that can easily be flipped, and that changes the logic. A less than switched to a greater than is a hard bug to find in 10,000 lines of code. Versus something where you have to type is less than or is greater than. Yeah, your mind can kind of elide over this and you lose that benefit because of the massive verbiage. But, you know, ultimately, I think the ragging on COBOL is just developers are too lazy to actually type and want everything handed to them on a platter. So let's see what chat has to say about this, because I think I did COBOL justice there for off the cuff, especially because my experience with COBOL was one semester in college and I hated it. Okay, heavy batch systems, it still has its use. Yeah, it still has its use. Go to New Jersey, some of their systems still written in COBOL. There's mainframe COBOL code that's been there for, 50 plus years? Because it works. For some of the CICS apps, it's worked really fast, used in a public utility, and the code just worked. Yeah, see, Raymond, there isn't any widely used technology that doesn't have its good attributes, says Mike. Yeah, everything has trade-offs, and some trade-offs are more interesting and important than others, to the point where some languages are considerably better than others. But sure, people use it because it works, at least to some extent. We don't tend to use things that are completely broken and completely ineffectual. You know, people tend to be a little bit smarter than that. I was gonna dunk on something there, but I couldn't figure out what I would dunk on. 0-1 print section. Yep. COBOL was data for business programming. Right. That was its specific use case. Working with data for explicit business purposes. Accounts receivable, accounts payable, utilities work, banking work, you know, things where you had specific business operations in which you were working with data. It was not going to be good for scientific language. It was not going to be good for data analysis. It wasn't going to be good for a lot of these other purposes, but it was really good for a fairly intelligent but not a computer scientist business analyst who just needed to write this system or make a modification of this system to handle the new tax rules in 1984. Well-written procedure sections explain the business logic fairly well. I mean, that's the advantage to having something that's closer to a natural language, where you can explain it in words and have it kind of come out as you would expect. Natural language has its downsides in that it is so vague, slippery. There are so many ways to phrase the same concept, and meaning is imbued in so many parts of unspoken language. That said, I can pick up a book and still read the book, so there's something to the natural language itself having value. Even the rocket launching language. I'm going to go, I think Mike is saying RPG for that, or Ada. RPG for the memes, Ada because I think that's actually what they used in in a space shuttle, I think. Could be wrong there. Call in if you know. So, RPG for the printing side. So I've never used RPG, and I'm not going to change. Those in business loved COBOL. Those working in it were not engineers or scientists. The scientists have Fortran. Now defend Fortran. So it's funny as I'm going through this. Yes, the people in chat, they understand. They understand. Defend Fortran. Every program is written in Fortran. No matter, real programmers write every program in Fortran, no matter what language they're using. I mean, I used Pascal as my example because I just went past the Fortran phase. There is an open source COBOL, tiny COBOL. Also, I have to point out that there was in fact a COBOL.net. It was part of it was part of the earliest .NET framework. .NET Framework 1, there actually was a COBOL.net. Also, there was it? I gotta find this out. Yes, my favorite. Sort of like Ruby on Rails, where you took a language that was not in high use and you changed it around a bit and turned it into what was a really popular language for a few years, a really popular framework, the Rails framework. You have COBOL on Wheelchair, and I loved that one. It was kind of a joke, but it actually does work, sort of. So you too can write COBOL today. Let's see. I think the main problem was before they figured out how to do indexed files. Yeah, we were talking, you're talking in those days, the hierarchical file system was your big data storage option of choice. And COBOL was intended to work really well with that. It was pre-relational data structures. So that's part of why COBOL died off. I think it was actually less about developers decide they don't want to type and therefore convince their managers to switch to other languages, and more of the way in which they access data changed, and it changed significantly enough that the languages had to change to meet that. SQL came out. Remember, COBOL was pre-SQL. So SQL as a language comes out and becomes an extremely popular domain-specific language for working with data. By the way, it's also a fairly verbose language. So in Des Moines, there are still a lot of COBOL coders. You find state governments in many states still have a lot of COBOL coders. They may or may not admit it. One of my friends who was a COBOL programmer left her job for family. 21 years later, got a job without even looking, offering even more than what her husband, an SAP consultant, makes. I like that story, Mala. I had to bite my tongue to keep from ragging on SAP just for the fun. I don't have any problems with SAP. I don't have any problems with HANA, mostly because I don't use them. I can't afford to use them is probably what I would say. But
the most overpriced piece of software. I'll stop with that.
I was gonna say most overpriced piece of software. Oracle and Teradata are calling. So there's a training that I help deliver, and
But I've seen, I must confess, I've seen people sitting out on SAP DBA jobs that have made me so jealous because they've not had anything much to do, but they are needed because, for the occasional patch or something goes wrong. They make really fat sums of money and they just sit there and do whatever the heck they want until they're needed.
that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. So one of the trainings I help deliver, the premise of it is that there's a customer who's on premises using a combination of Oracle, SAP HANA, and Teradata. And when the question of how much money are you willing to spend on this new project comes up, the answer is we're already paying for Oracle, SAP HANA, and Teradata. Either we are filthy rich or we're completely out of money. You decide. Ask me to defend APL and Forth. So I've not enough information on either language to know too much about either of them. I'm vaguely familiar with their existence, have never seen code in either of those languages, and we're far enough beyond the point where uh, people would take more than a hobbyist's interest in it. So it hasn't made sense for me to dig into that. If uh, I'm all for diving into niches. I mean, I love functional programming. Um, so there are definitely niches within functional programming you can live in. Like Haskell as a language is a great language to learn functional programming in. It's a terrible language to develop code in. Uh, Sorry to any actual production Haskell developers. You guys are great. Just side effects are useful. So the COBOL I worked with, everyone had their own compiler. Later on COBOL, yeah, you could do that. You didn't necessarily have to go to the single mainframe. I actually had, I think it was COBOL on Linux when I was in college. Visual COBOL, yes. So that's what I was thinking of. There was Visual COBOL, but then there was also COBOL.net. And that was 1999, 1998, somewhere around there. It was just when the .NET framework was really coming into play, maybe 2001, 2002, really early on. But that was back when Microsoft was like, we have .NET. You can write any language in the world and we'll support all of the languages. Here's our Java. Here's our C++. Here's C. Here's Visual Basic. We're coming out with this new language, C#. You'll love it, I'm sure. And here's COBOL. So $9 billion worth of sales in COBOL on Windows. Code works. COD designed SQL in the early 70s. COBOL was designed in the 50s. Yeah, COBOL was quite a bit before, and it was back in the hierarchical data storage days. So people finally wised up about SAP. Oracle's not even close to SAP. Now, them's fighting words, Anders. One company I worked for, we had $500 million SAP project. We scaled it back 50%, ended up at $700 million. Those salesmen. I think it's because the Germans who own SAP just want to have a larger yacht than Larry Ellison. SAP made Microsoft give us read committed snapshot isolation. I'm happy for that. It was made to support SAP and take the customers away from going Oracle's way. Yeah, optimistic concurrency, we're at a point where I think that should be the default, and I don't think there's a strong reason not to. And I don't know that I'm willing to fight over that, but I don't think pessimistic concurrency is really that important nowadays. It was a lot more important when you had really slow disk. When you have faster disk and a lot of RAM, optimistic concurrency, I think, makes a huge amount more sense. You can still run out of memory. You can still bork a system, but it's really difficult to do if you have your servers appropriately sized. That's my hot take on RCSI. It's not that hot. It's a lukewarm take. Mike says there are so many esoteric languages with wonderful attributes, and functional programming isn't a wonderful attribute per se, but recursion is. Functional programming, so the concepts behind functional programming make it wonderful. The fact that it is a functional language is not itself wonderful, but the ability to work without side effects, or more appropriately, to define where you're going to have side effects. The ability to make functions first order, the ability to, lambdas and currying. This stuff makes languages a lot more useful. So those are wonderful attributes that come when you say this is a functional programming language. Let's see. Because adding RCSI for the majority of their customers wasn't a good enough reason. Well, I would defend Microsoft in that respect, Solomon, that it's not, oh, we don't care about the customers. It's more of the customers weren't complaining about it because they didn't know. A lot of SQL Server customers at that point weren't really that deep into, oh, well, Oracle offers optimistic concurrency, and here's what optimistic concurrency can do. And here's how it would look in your environment. So, I guess, yes, from the standpoint of, let's make the customers' lives better. But, in so many cases, they can put out something that they think will make customers' lives better and may actually make their lives better, but customers don't realize it and never pick it up and never use it. And at that point, you have certain projects that get partially implemented and never finished because customers didn't adopt it. And then you have like half the features since 2012.
So most features, by the way, are driven by something like that. It's not unique to that one feature. That's the only one we know of a direct correlation to the vendor, but almost every major feature out there is because some big customer or vendor is asking for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I totally believe that.
Justifies the effort they put in, and they have evidence that it's going to be revenue.
Right. And big customers move. They have enormous budgets, and they can by themselves justify a thing. If I'm gonna steal one of TG's stories, I'll minimize it so that he tells it a lot better anyhow. But one of his stories is that when he was working for a gambling company in Europe, there were some games. There was one game that basically was, I phrase it as a random number generator on your phone. So you push a button, get a random number generator, and you win money or you lose money. That's effectively all it was. It was just push a button on a phone. And they wanted to shut that project down internally. So people were like, there's one user. Why do we even have this project still around? I mean, we could save money. And the project manager says, no, you see, that one user is a Russian oligarch. He's paying for that project, plus these 3 other projects, plus the salaries of your entire team, because he loves pushing that button. So we're going to support that button. If he says he wants 2 buttons, we're going to give him 2 buttons because it's worth it. And, when you start talking 8 digits that you're paying Microsoft, you get 2 buttons. Microsoft was also running SAP internally. Yeah, that's going back far enough that I don't recall. I will take your words for it, though, Anders. I know that they were tight with Sybase around that same time, but did not know so much about SAP. Let's see. How many here use F# or are looking into it? Yeah, I use F# pretty regularly. I am obviously a pretty big fan of the language. So yeah. There's actually a Triangle F# group They meet the first Tuesday of the month, and it's a pretty good group. It's a small group, but it's a good group to be a part of. Ballmer gave our CIO his direct number to call if we found bugs that were showstoppers and not fixed. That happens sometimes, and you don't want their CIO to call. So yeah, you fix that stuff.
That was because that was the push to go live with SAP on SQL Server. Ours was the first install that went live, and it was a huge deal for them.
Sure.
So that if SAP would push SQL Server as the preferred platform to all their customers, millions of dollars right there, just with that one move.
True. True. So Raymond says, these languages show a swing of data usage from centralized systems to distributed and back almost every 10 to 15 years. There is nothing new under the sun. The cloud is to modern day what the mainframe was to the 70s. And the Dilbert cartoon from the late 80s that says you have a centralized org chart, and the boss, the pointy hair boss, who, by the way, at that point in time, the pointy hair boss didn't even have pointy hair. That's how old this cartoon is. Pointy hair boss says, we need to decentralize things. And then 6 months later, you have the decentralized org chart. We need to centralize things. These swings, they just tend to happen. People go and say, well, this situation is not great. So let's try the opposite, because I'm sure that it will be better. And then people jump over to the opposite, and they say, well, this situation isn't great. Let's go jump over to the opposite. And we just kind of bounce back and forth in that. I made mention a couple times hierarchical data structures. Well, document databases kind of act as today's hierarchical data structures. Arguably, they're more of object data structures. You can sell it either way, but it is a look back at a prior form of data storage. And there are benefits to document databases. There are uses for document databases. And there was this big push among developers because, well, SQL is hard. I don't quite understand that mentality, that you can learn C# or Java or Python or some other language, but SQL is that bridge too far. Nonetheless, there's been a pretty big push in the developer community back toward that hierarchical document structure, and there's been a counter pushback that a new generation of people remember why hierarchical data structures are limited and why the relational form really dominated. It's not true that there's nothing new. Literally speaking, yes, I agree. Figuratively speaking, no, there's nothing new under the sun. Quantized embedded artificial intelligence, DNNs and FPGAs didn't exist when I did control programming with CPL. This is true, but neural networks. Let's see. The theoretical foundations of neural networks have been around since the 50s. Artificial intelligence since I think the 60s. AI since the 50s, and frankly, the idea of thinking machines goes back quite a bit earlier than that. Field programmable gate arrays, yes, it is something that is only like 10 years old, 15 years old in practice. But again, they're not doing anything that's crazy. I mean, it's specialized machines instead of a general computing machine. Oh, please. But, fundamentally, the problems they're trying to solve are still the same. The techniques that they're using to solve, yes, they adapt over time. And so it's not like we're all just doing exactly the same thing that we did hundreds of years ago. but we're still trying to solve the same problems, and we're still trying to move in the same directions. Let's see. The goal of SQL Server 7 was to be able to move internal accounting to SQL. Gotta have a goal. And Solomon's point or grumble wasn't specific about RCSI, just the overall mentality. It worked out well in the case of RCSI, maybe not for lightweight pooling. Yeah, there's another case where one customer said, we need a thing. I would like to think that community requests will be given more weight. That will depend a lot on the product team and on the request. So there are some things that came about specifically because of community requests, but the thing to keep in mind on community request is that the community is a fraction of a percent of the actual base, of the buyer base of SQL Server. The number of people who are active in a SQL Server community is a pretty small percentage. It's a vocal percentage. It's an influential percentage. If some community person says, hey, wouldn't X be cool? It's much more likely that X gets into the product. And when you think about the community, like if you look at Azure feedback for SQL Server, if you look at it for Power BI, there's a huge number of things in there, many of which are just not going to be done because it doesn't make sense to do it. But B, some product teams actually do a pretty good job of this. Like the Power BI team actually does a good job of prioritizing community input. They will generally not work on something unless it has a high enough feedback rating in their in the feedback systems they use. So that is actually a thing that they do. Other product teams, not so good about it, and they are going to probably be more driven by the big customer, in part because they need the big customer. Like if you're talking about, say, machine learning services, there aren't an enormous number of machine learning services customers. So, yeah, so like Andrew says, they're not necessarily representative for most users or buyers, the community. And it's, as a seller, as a retailer, it is a little difficult to try to thread that needle of, I have a lot of different people who are yelling a lot of different things into my ear at the same time, and I only have so much time in the day to do it. There are people going to user groups showing off emulated PDP assembly language. Why? So, Mike, the answer to that, they don't know that, but the real answer to it is so that they can prove me right.
Love that.
Actually, because the PDP-8 was such a great blinker. It had so many great blinking lights.
So I think they do listen to community requests, but it depends on how big a request it is and the way, marketing drives features that's kind of known for a long time. So that's why some features come in and never take off.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's no point fighting that at that level, but they do. I mean, depending on the nature of your request, like the truncate enhancement is one of my favorite things that they actually listened and made that change.
Oh, string or binary data would be truncated.
Right.
Yep. So that was the highest feedback item that SQL Server ever had. And there's good reason for it. We had actually, some of us at Channel Advisor had gone out to Microsoft for an engagement, and they have sit-downs with the customers. Actually, if Microsoft brings a customer out there, they'll have lunch with the customer, and it's like a big pizza party with development teams. All the developers are allowed to come in. Anybody's allowed to come in. Product managers come in. And we basically presented, hey, here's who we are as a company. Here's how we use SQL Server. Here's the type of stuff that we do. And one of the explicit questions or things that they wanted us to say was, what types of enhancements, what types of things would you like to see? And top of our list was stringer binary data would be truncated. Fix that. We had heard from one of the developers in there. Yeah, I've actually taken a look at this code, and it's not that easy because the area where that error message gets bubbled up to, you don't know what that information is anymore. So it apparently took a good amount of effort to fix what looks like a minor diagnostic issue, but actually took a lot of effort to get in, and that's why it had sat for so long. So I'm really glad that that it did get fixed. Capability-wise, SQL Server 2000 would probably cover the needs of most SQL shops.
Oh, that I don't know. That's a very general statement to say. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. I mean,
capability-wise, I'm trying to argue your point internally, Anders. I don't know that I want to agree with that.
I don't agree either.
And so thinking about data type enhancements since 2000.
Say more on what you mean by capabilities.
Yeah, like if you're talking about a very simplistic few tables with a couple of stored procedures, 10,000 rows, you're much more likely to get away with that on 2000. But there's a lot that's been added since 2000, and I think we're you may be underestimating the value that's been added since then, and underestimating that even the normies use some of that stuff effectively. Ran 800 gig tables on SQL 2000, right? And there were terabyte databases in SQL 2000. It's crazy, but sure. Though again, putting your point back, most shops wouldn't have somebody like you. Yeah, like if you said you have the capabilities of SQL Server 2000, but all of the bug fixes, the TLS support, like a lot of the security and back end stability, I don't want to agree with you, but I probably would. Let's see. Mike says there's a reason to bring back 6502 assembly emulators of game consoles, which allow all those nifty arcade games to come back into the world, because gaming has become way less fun and way more complicated with photorealism. Maybe. More complicated? Yes. Less fun? I don't think so. So let me give you an example. This admittedly isn't going to be photorealism necessarily, but I got to playing City Skylines a little while back and put in enough hours that I'm surprised I actually had that many hours available, and really got into it. Picked up enhancements, picked up mods that would visually enhance the game, try to make it look more like a more modern game, take advantage of more powerful GPUs. Then, for a lark, I had a blog post about SQL Server supporting Polybase on Linux in CTP 2.5 of, I think it was SQL Server 2019. And I just put together that blog post where, I'm going to talk about mass destruction and SimCity 2000, because we all played SimCity 2000 so that we could go into cheat mode, have billions of dollars, put out all of these houses and infrastructure, and then have the aliens come and destroy it all. Have the earthquakes, have the mass riots. Half the fun was in destroying the cities. Probably 2/3 of the fun was in destroying the cities. And so I still had, there were cheat codes in SimCity 2000. Yes, there were. There were free money cheat codes. I used those free money cheat codes quite often. But I had opened it up. Yeah, I installed it on a modern machine, opened the thing up, and it was hideous. I remember SimCity 2000 looking really great. I remember on my CRT monitor just spending an enormous number of hours. Back then, I was in school, so I could spend an enormous number of hours on it. But I look at it today and say, I can't play this game. And what's interesting is, I think that time frame hit probably sometime in about the 90s on PC games. And around the PlayStation 1 era and the Sega Saturn era of consoles. If you go back to the sprite-driven games, Genesis, Super Nintendo even, the NES, graphics obviously were not better. Graphics were a lot worse, but there were enough really good-looking games for those generations that I can open up today and enjoy. It is really hard to enjoy a Sega Saturn game or a PlayStation 1 game because it's all tilated and pixelated and just nasty. The Saturn games that I most enjoy actually are the ones that are more sprite-based. They were like late Genesis and were ported over to the Saturn instead of being 3D polygon-driven games. But back in 1997, if you had a PlayStation or you had a Sega Saturn, this was the future. This was beautiful graphics. Look at how great Spyro the Dragon looks. And then we come back today, 25 years later, and say, this thing is awful. How could I even tell what anything was on the screen? So, I think that there was a dip, and the visualization, the improved graphics, definitely have made things better. Now, more complicated, yes, and I think that complication in many cases is not good. In simulators, it's good. You play a later version of Football Manager or a really well done simulator, and they just go into so much depth that you didn't have. Out of the park, current versions versus versions over the past 15 years. Granted, Out of the Park has always been kind of a numbers geek type of game. But yeah, AAA titles, I think, for the most part, have disappointed in the past decade. And I'd actually say this is the Hollywood effect for gaming, that you have games that are so expensive to make that people are afraid to try new things. The games that do best tend to be from shops where they're either not spending as much money on it or have a YOLO mentality of, well, this may be the game that bankrupts us, but who cares? We want to make the games we want to make. But then the major games like EA, the anything that EA touches, they'll spend a huge amount of money on the same thing. Talk to me about Madden sometime. Okay, let's come back here. Last September got turned on to Minetest.net, which is open source Minecraft. Huh, interesting. So Mike says, I could never understand the people I knew at IBM who had enormous numbers of hours to play World of Warcraft. I can't imagine that amount of time spent only moving your fingers. World of Warcraft was not something I ever got into, but I knew people who did, and that type of game is incredibly addictive. There is a psychological basis for those sorts of addictions. It's the same with mobile gaming, where actually it's also the same with something like Facebook. You hire psychologists to try to figure out what is addictive to people, and small amounts of pleasure regularly given actually ends up getting people addicted to a thing. So you start out with giving them a lot, and then you kind of stretch it further and further, and they're still going to grind to get the thing. So I need to spend another 5 hours to level up to the next level so that I can defeat the dragon and get the +6 sword instead of the +5 sword. And when you say it with no context, it sounds really dumb. But when you're in on this, the joy of, hey, I got the +6 sword, there's something to that. So, sorry to Pied Piper the conversation. Frankly, this conversation was going to go nowhere anyhow, so no worries, Mike. Let's see. All I can say about gaming, my top 5 games on Steam have cost me less than 1 penny per hour. That's fair. My rule is if I spend $1 per hour, it's an okay game. And I've got games where, yeah, even if I paid full retail price, I'm still less than a penny per hour. Like Football Manager I actually got for free, and I don't like soccer at all. And yet, I've spent more hours on that than I care to admit on a broadcast. All 3 kids love Mind Test, obsessed so much that one of them is turning 10 tomorrow and wants Minecraft, nothing else. Again, there's another example. Fairly simplistic game that made enormous amounts of money. Small community expanding it all the time by adding more mods. Yep. +6 sword and magic helmet. Anybody up for D&D? No use except for learning my plutonic solids. Ooh, Space Quest and King's Quest. Yeah, those were good games. Early LucasArts was really good about this. The adventure games, those were some really good games. But now we've definitely gone way a kilter. So let me make sure. I did want to mention 2 things before we cut out. One is a quick review, Data Saturday number 1. So Data Saturday number 1 was Pordenone, Italy. And Data Saturday number 2 actually already happened. That was in Guatemala in January. But this is the original Data Saturday, which is the 2nd. If you haven't seen it yet, datasaturdays.com is a fairly new endeavor. It was started up in the wake of SQL Saturday going down. With SQL Saturday potentially coming back up, it'll be interesting to see what happens here. But there are about 10 events listed on the Data Saturdays website, including the Women in Tech event that Mala is helping put on the 5th.
Yep. Please spread the word. And it's a first event. I would say, we did what we could, and we plan on more focused better organized events in the future. So this is the first one. Please give us your support if you have time.
So yeah, check that out. Mala has dropped the link into chat. And with that, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I've got one other item. Let's see if I can sneak it in. So got an email after last Shop Talk saying that, hey, in SQL Server 2012, open up Management Studio and it's showing a data size at 640 megabytes. But then I go look at the MDF file on the drive, assuming Windows Explorer, and it's about 300 megabytes. It's on a SAN. There are no NDFs. There are no partitions. There are no additional files. It's just the one file. And what could possibly explain this? So I did ask a follow-up question, but didn't get the answer to it. So couple possibilities that I can come up with. Data versus free space. That might be. Basically, first item, if the person's looking at the size on the General tab in Management Studio, the General tab combines log files as well as data files. So it may say that your size is 640 megabytes and you have 390 free. That would be, hey, your log file is 340 megabytes. If that's what the person was talking about, that explains it pretty easily. But if you go to the Files tab and it says 640 for the MDF, the only other thing that I could think of offhand was maybe SAN deduplication, SAN compression that's getting information provided back to the host and saying that this thing is 300 megabytes. I don't know of any SANs that actually do that, but I started grasping at straws at that point. Andrew says block size. I don't know if block size would make twice the size difference. I wouldn't expect block size to make that big of a difference. Because we're talking 300 megabytes to 640 megabytes. Was it an HP SAN? I saw some weirdness on those if you had the wrong one. Don't know about that. Were there other files? No other files. Not on a different volume or anything else. Just the one MDF. No NDFs. No secondary files. What shop talk are we talking about? Well, we are just about to stop talking shop, but we were talking about Management Studio and showing the size of databases and some oddities with respect to that. But unfortunately, our time here is up for the night. So with that, I want to say thank you. Was SSMS updated? Well, we're talking SSMS 2012 probably, so maybe. I don't know, the original person would have to, OP might have to follow up. But we'll be happy to see you again in 2 weeks. By the way, to help Mala be on camera so that it's not just me you're looking at, we're probably going to switch this to 6 p.m. Eastern time starting 2 weeks from now. So
thank you, Kevin.
If that sounds absolutely horrible that it will wreck your life, let me know. But otherwise, we'll switch to 6 p.m. And with that, call it an evening. Everybody, take care.
Thank you.